All right, greetings. Welcome to another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast with Sam Simmons and myself, Brandon Jones. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about leadership. And we're going to talk about leadership in the Black community specifically, or just leadership in general. We're going to try to touch all aspects of it. But before we jump into the actual topic, how are you doing today, Sam?
I'm good. Nothing to complain about. Still in the basement, still locked down. I only come out every now and then, and one of the places I was coming out of or going to have a case of COVID, and I didn't go this week, so I'm good. We all good. Again, my heart and mind and condolences out for all of us who have been deeply affected, have lost loved ones because of it. We're gonna get through this. How we get through this and how what it looks like afterwards is an interesting piece, but that's a conversation for another day. Because today we're going to talk about, as you mentioned, leadership. But one of the reasons I wanted to do that is, we have our Martin Luther King celebration tomorrow, right, and which is always interesting to me, and how the white community or the system wants to, talk about Martin Luther King and want to talk about, use quotes, and everybody does it. Everybody's kind of have that issue. Use quotes to validate their points, and talk about the hope and the belief he wanted to have in America. And some over 50 years later, some of his same quotes, especially towards the end of his life, still apply.
Right.
And one of the quotes that I want to do two of them, and then we can go from there. But they found a beginning of a speech, a lecture that he was going to give. I think at the Poor People's March, because they have been putting that together. In his pocket on the day of his death, I believe. And the title of the speech was "Why America May Go to Hell." And I'm going to read a couple lines from it. And it goes as, "And I come by here to say that America too is going to hell if she doesn't use her wealth. If America doesn't use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all of God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell." And it goes on and talk about all the accomplishments that America brags about in terms of the buildings it has built, being able to go to the moon, and all of these kind of things, and talks about being at the knee of God and what God would say. We'll talk about this indictment of what America didn't do for its people when it had all this power.
Right.
And the ironic part, it still applies. Right. It's like after 50 years, but we still got politicians, black and white, who want to quote Martin Luther King, especially over the next 2 days, and use it to try to validate, why don't you black people calm down? What's wrong with you? Why are you always upset? Right. The other quote that I just seen this earlier today was about democracy. We must face the hard face of that, the hard facts that many Americans would like to have a nation which is a democracy for white people, white Americans, but simultaneously a dictatorship over black Americans.
We see that play out a lot.
I found that quote so appropriate for what we're experiencing right now.
Mm.
So appropriate. So I wanted to start with that, and yeah. So
Yeah.
any thoughts?
Yeah. I think King's vision and mindset and just his authentic honesty about what was going on and what he's seen at that time, not a lot has changed. It might have changed from more overt what we see, but covertly the way that people engage, black folks is in that same manner. I think that last statement of, we want democracy for white folks, but we want a more of a dictatorship for black people. You see that right now. It's what we've been calling Karenism, and how a lot of white women now have been being captured on camera dictating how things should be, things should be going um with black people. For example, I seen this video a few days ago of this white woman in a bagel shop who didn't want to wear a mask, so they called the police. And this is in Florida. And the officer that came was a non-white person. I don't know if he was black. I couldn't tell because of his mask, and he was, he had like a hat on because he's a police officer. But he wasn't white. You can tell by his arms, and you can tell kind of by how he was speaking that he wasn't a white person. And the way she was talking to this officer was just crazy. And then probably about 2 minutes into the video, a white officer appears and she turns to the white officer. She says, "You should be ashamed of yourself. You're gonna let this happen." I was just like, these are both the same officer responding to the same situation, but her, from what she's seen, the way she was responding to the black officer was more like that dictatorship. Like, you don't tell me what to do. I tell you, even though this is authority, this is somebody who's responding to a call from a business that was trying to remove this woman because she was, doing what what Karens do. And then the white officer though was a whole different type of demeanor. But we see this happen all the time, and it highlights the hypocrisy one in the system that we live in, but also the racial dynamics that no matter what position that you're in, racism always rises to the top as far as how we interrelate from an interpersonal basis. Now it doesn't have to, but oftentimes it does.
Yeah. And the whole thing, blue lives matter unless it has a black inner, right? So
Right.
and the same thing in terms of the capital, right? How you respond, you got on average white individuals showing at state capitals with guns more often than any black person or person of color, right? But you're going to find them less dangerous,
Right.
right? So so it all, you like you said, it always comes to the surface. No matter if we're talking about, as some people call well-meaning white folks, when it always still comes to the surface, right?
Right.
In some kind of capacity. And so yeah. So let's get back to the part around leadership. I was thinking, when I was thinking about this today and actually last night about what the topic was going to be for today, is that I remember that when we first met, do you remember when we first met? We met because you were doing what is it, thesis or
Yeah,
something
my master's thesis, yeah.
on what?
Black male leadership. So for my first master's degree, my plan was to interview 12 to 15 black men or just black leaders, period, in the Twin Cities area, and figure out what is black leadership and why isn't it as effective as we believe that it is. And I was suggested by a Latino gentleman who was my professor to talk to you, and I didn't know who you were. And I just kind of I took down some names that he mentioned, but he's like, you definitely need to talk to Sam. But I didn't think nothing of it. And then probably about a week or two later, I was reading the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder magazine and seen an article with you in there. I was like, oh, this is the dude my professor was talking about. And then that's what prompted me to go ahead and follow up and connect with you. So that's how we got connected.
Yeah. And so in that, what did you learn?
I've learned a lot, man. And at some point I'll probably take that master's thesis and convert some of it into a book because it is pretty long. But when I met you, I had probably interviewed maybe 4 people, and actually Melvin Carter was one of the people I interviewed as well. This is before he was the mayor, and I didn't meet him just yet. But I had to take a hard stop on my trajectory of where I was thinking, because I wasn't even factoring in trauma and how that shows up. And that was really like the centerpiece of what was going on in our community and with the Black leaders. Is our trauma gets in the way of our progress collectively and individually. And I learned that when it comes to leadership, we have been conditioned to look at one particular person to lead us and not see the leadership within ourselves, which in order to do that, we have to be able to deal with our own trauma.
Yeah. So, interesting. And the thing is when you came to me, what you you said after you met with me, you had to make changes in your paper.
Right.
Why was that?
Because I wasn't thinking of trauma wasn't even a thing that was in my head before meeting you and realizing, oh, this is actually something that people talk about and work on and try to do something constructive around. The word trauma to me was always in a medical model, since I worked in hospitals for most of my life at that point. So when I thought of trauma, I'm thinking of people who have like blood, brute force trauma, gunshots, people been stabbed, things like that. But you're saying, no, we're talking about psychological trauma and something that's happened to us as people. And this is why we show up the way that we do. So that I wasn't even thinking of that. And I was like, wow, that explains a lot about why the community is in the shape that it's in. And it also talks about why we haven't moved forward, because nobody's really having that nobody's having that conversation about what trauma is.
Well, they having conversations. You're hearing more and more. I mean, we'll get to this in a minute about what makes a leader, especially within our community. How do we define them? Which is many ways. Is they use the words, but I don't think they apply them to the community or to themselves.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially now because it's popular to do so.
Right.
Right. It's because I've even have had folks in leadership positions in the community who barely speak to me, but all of a sudden want to be my friend and want to talk about, you was on to something with this trauma thing, and you think we could talk about it? Oh, okay. Yeah, we can, and I will, but it's always interesting to the response. And so I think that's where we end up coming up short, is we still can't get it to what I would call really into how does that trauma show up in the community, and how does that trauma really affects how we respond to everything around us, right? And more importantly, how it affects how we respond to each other as well. And so there's different types of leadership, and when I examine the topic around leadership, and especially community leadership, there's a few that come up, like role model leadership, where we have a community leader who is, committed to their journey, and and people see them, and I think sometime that leadership gets undermined or looked down to, but in our community, I think the role model leadership is so important, especially when you're dealing with the current generation that's very visual and that kind of stuff. And our current generation, grew up with people in their community and outside of their community lying to them, right? And I was talking to a group of young men, I'll give a little shout out to my youngest member of my group. He's been watching, and he's been picking it up, and but they watch you, and like what I told them is if a person's words and their behavior don't match, be suspect.
Right.
And we've been running into that consistently within our community in terms of folks who have been defined as leaders in our community, right? You go out, you talk about being nonviolent, supporting Black women and supporting the women in the community, and on the other hand, you're taking sexually advantage of women in positions where they're working with you, or you taking even worse yet, taking advantage of women who are in situations where they're homeless, right? And not just even women, but children and that kind of stuff. And I get, and I know that, it's like, do we hold our Black leadership at a higher standard? Sometimes I think we should hold us at a too high standard, right? Because you can be a good leader and not have to be perfect.
Correct.
Right. But at the same time, we really have to be aware if we're really worried about our young people, because again, you talk about gangs and you talk about, but some of that same stuff that our young people are acting out is much more dangerous. Or the same thing we have acting out amongst our community leadership is the same thing as acting out even at the state capitol, right? But you want them to act more appropriate than you're capable of, right? Right. And so, one of the quotes I throw out is a role model is one who realizes the babies are watching him and acts accordingly.
Right.
Because they're always watching. And a young person taught that to me. They're always watching, right? They're always watching. So you have that type of leadership. You have facilitative leadership, somebody who understands the conditions and dynamics and who knows how to create environments that support things like healing, support change, and I think that type of leader we see, but I don't always know if they're the healthiest in the world, always. But again, they believe they have a good understanding of those conditions and dynamics of what's going on, and trying to get the community to understand and go forward, which gets followed by a strategic leader, somebody who is taking on the responsibility to share a vision, articulate how we move forward, articulate how to focus and pivot on economic and political decisions. And that particular leader, I think, sometimes get lost in the shuffle, because you're talking about putting in some work, right? And the strategy that they might have might not be a strategy that you are either capable of doing or you don't want to, right? Because it might call, it's like people are talking. I was doing a group with a group of young men and women about what does it take to change, and we had a really good conversation as we went on about how difficult it is to change, and they were just talking about within the community when the people that you need to either change how you deal with them or get away from them is your family,
right,
or your community, right? And it's like, and so the strategies for the change might not look like what you want to look like, right? If your strategy is kill Whitey, you might not like a strategy of talking about how do we deal with politics,
right.
So, but I think the one that, I think that we don't see as much of, or we got folks proclaim they are what we call healing leadership. Leadership that can lead the healing process. And some people would call our spiritual leaders, part of our healing leadership, right? But we're talking about somebody who actually, the people I've seen who've done this well in our community have done obvious work on themselves.
Right.
Have done obvious work on themselves. They've done obvious work on themselves, and we're not talking about those stories that people like hearing. Once I was, I did 20,000 years, and I done found my way, and and you can do it too. But the ones I've seen who just, you can see they made the change and they do the work, and they're not as enamored with their story. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but I think that it's a concept that many people struggle with because we have an expectation that our leaders are supposed to show up a particular way. And if they have a story, it doesn't matter if they're healing. If they can tell a good story or they have some charisma, they can lead.
Right.
And we are being led down a road that is dark, and we might get clubbed over the head. It might not make it out that alleyway with some of the folks that we consider to be leaders, because we've been conditioned to understand leaders in a particular way, whether they're spiritual leaders or not. What I'm saying is, first you need to learn how to lead yourself. Leadership starts at home, and if you haven't done your healing work, you're going to get led astray and get manipulated. One of the things that we have to be honest about in our community, and this is across the board, is that we've been manipulated by quote unquote leaders all the time. And this is why we're so suspicious of people, because we've been hurt and harmed. But there's a reason why these folks end up having followings. It's because they have because we've been conditioned to connect with people a particular way. They have charisma. They have a good story that they can tell, or they can tell, what I call two truths and a lie. Where they tell you two things and then they give you that lie, or they give you a half truth, which is really the hook. Not even a lie, it's just a half truth. And then we get caught and we just follow them because of our own trauma.
Right.
One thing that I've learned about trauma, because I do a lot of work around social emotional intelligence, and trauma affects your social emotional intelligence. It affects your abilities to communicate.
Yes.
It affects your ability to articulate what is being communicated to you. It can make things that seem to be safe but are not. It can make things that are unsafe safe. It can make things that are safe unsafe, so it can confuse you.
Right.
And this is what ends up happening. So when you have somebody who can be articulate enough, who can tell the truth here and there, you will be led astray. And I see it all. I see it in the Black conscious community. I see it locally here in this community, here in the Twin Cities. I see it in the spiritual communities all the time. Because there's a baked in way to do that with that particular, and that's in all religious sectors that I've seen, is people get led down these roads, and we have to be careful with who you are allowing to be your leader. At the end of the day, you should lead yourself first, and then everything else should be an influence. Because at the end of the day, if you are under the age of, I used to say 18, but hell, these days kids start doing their own stuff at like 12. But if you under the age of 16, probably. At that point, you should be looking for guidance to other people. But if you're over that age, you need to start taking some agency over yourself to start directing your life in the way that it need to be. And unfortunately, we get beat down so bad due to our trauma that we don't know that. We just look for somebody who understands us and may say a few things that connect with us emotionally, and then we start following those people. And it's bad, man. And that's males and females, by the way, male and female leadership.
That's true. And I think the big piece is, I always say, when we look at leadership, sometime if you smell good, talk good, look good, you can lead folks. So a person who is needing water away from it. You know, so we want to feel good, right? We want to feel good, and a lot of things that we need to talk about, need to deal with, and need to address don't feel good, at least not in the short term, right? And it's like, how do we identify who is the leadership within our community, right? How do we end up deeming a person a leader? Which has always been an interesting question to me. And we know that a lot of our leadership, early leadership in the Black community came up out of the church, which is understandable, right? That was the one place that we had relationships with. There's one place that at one time whites would let us gather without them being around. Initially, they wouldn't let us gather without them being around. And a lot of times, especially when you talk about early in the day, the most educated people in the community might have been the preacher and the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so and again, when the ironic part, me saying this, me saying this, and even if folks agree with what I'm saying, because I'm saying it in reference to giving this kind of, abbreviated thing about leadership in the church, there's folks offended by you just even bringing it up.
Pointing it out, yes.
Right, and it ain't, and the thing is it's not an all or nothing kind of thing, which is another trauma response, right? Two things can be true at the same time, right. Because I have, I almost sound like white people when they say, I got friends who are Black, but I got I got pastors that I have great relationships with. And know why we got great relationship with them? Because I've had a pastor ask, how do you deal with Sam? Because people ask that question all the time. You might have even been asked that question. How do you deal with Sam?
I have.
Yeah, and the past, and I remember, I never forget it. He sat there because I didn't know this, and he just laughed. He said, "I let Sam be Sam."
Yeah.
And within that, what he was saying, because this particular pastor that I have a lot of respect for, have visibly done his healing work.
Right.
And will continually can say, I am not done. Right?
Right.
And I know, I don't know this, but I can feel this before he came to that, because he's been a pastor. He's a pastor's son, but he's been a pastor. And when he came to that part where he felt like he was at the lowest spot, and he took what he knew in terms of his relationship with God, and then also being able to actually reach out past that relationship within the church, right? Like for counseling and that kind of stuff, I can see it. See, the thing is that you when you're talking about healing, and I tell people about this with my clients all the time, it ain't about, well, how do you know that they're healed? You can see it. You can see it. Right. That's why I love working with the brothers in the hood. You can see it.
Right.
You can see it and you can hear it.
Right.
And it just happens. Right.
Right.
And
it's like a switch. It's like a switch was taken out. Yeah. And what that is, Sam, is it goes back to traditional psychology, cognitive behavior therapy. It's about your emotions, your thoughts, and your actions all interconnect. Right. So that's what happens when we are able to help people get that understanding and help them think differently. They start to feel different and they start to behave different.
Right. And the other piece about that is when they get that look in their face, ironically, they're less in a basic way, reliant on you. And what I
Right.
mean by that is we have a tendency to work with our people in a way that they're almost emotional dependent on us to function.
Right. Which is not the goal.
No, I mean the thing is, and we see that with certain leadership. You know, they come in. If you, I've been around, leaders, black leaders that we all well known, and been in the room with them. And if you wasn't kowtowing to them, they didn't know. They didn't want to know who you was.
Right.
You know, personally, I'm uncomfortable when people make. I think I'm more comfortable in the grouchy realm. He's nothing but a grouch. Than I am when people are giving me compliments. I don't know how to act like that. I don't even know how to respond well. I'm getting better. It's like, you've seen it when people say, Mr. Simmons, you're my mentor. Man, get away from me. And the thing is, and then, people who get to know me after, at first they probably get their little feelings hurt. I called him a mentor. And he told me to get away from him. And then folks who hang out with me long enough, oh man, now they be messing with me. You're my mentor, and they be laughing and all that because they know it. They know it make me uncomfortable, right?
Right.
Because I take that very seriously. I've even had folks say, Mr. Simmons, you're one of our community leaders. Oh, please don't do that to me. Please don't do that to me, right? It's like. Because now I gotta, feel like I gotta live up to a image that I don't know if I can live up to, right? Because I was lucky enough about a week ago that one of my female colleagues said, what we need to realize, and she was talking about black men, is that we got to start. Recognizing the good men and not looking for the perfect man. And I think that's true about leadership too.
Right.
Because again, all or nothing response is a trauma response. You all good, you all bad. I know when they freaked out when Martin Luther King was found out to have girlfriends, right? And like, yeah, it's disappointing, and the hope is, unfortunately, is that leaders who follow behind him learn from that in a way of, that's not what you want to do when you're leading people, right? In terms of that role, that's where that role model piece come in, right? With it, but you know what? Some of the young leaders learn from that. You just gotta do it better and not get caught. And I've had them here to say that. It's like, whoa, wrong message, bro.
Yeah. But even that message is again based in trauma because they're trying to do one or two things, right? They're trying to connect and build a rapport with you by their fractured understanding of masculinity and manhood,
right?
And say things like, oh yeah, I got this one, that one, and this one, right? So they're trying to, and you know what? The crazy thing is, Sam, we've been together out of state where other people have said that to us after we've met like their wives and stuff.
Right.
Like, yeah. So I've seen this happen with you. Were we in DC? Where were we at? We were somewhere. I don't remember it, but it was crazy.
Yeah,
I've seen that happen, man. And all of this stuff revolves around trauma. When we do not do that work on ourselves, I don't think that you really can be an effective leader because you're continuing to produce the ripple effects of trauma and you're causing more harm than good. It reminds me of this client I had, and I've told this story before on a podcast. I had this young boy. He was like 12 or 13. He wasn't in high school just yet. Black boy, big old boy too. I mean, he was 12, but he looked like he was about 16. This big old boy, grandma taking care of him. And mom taking care of him. Grandma was the one who got him in therapy. And I was seeing him in the summertime and therapy was going good. And school was getting ready to start. And the mom was like, Brandon, what do you think that I should do with him? Like, he's doing good, but school's getting ready to start. I want to get him active. I said, honestly, I would put him in football because the boy is big. And she was like, okay, let's get him in football. So this is in Minneapolis. They get him on a little, pee wee football team. And then he kind of disappeared for like a month and a half or so. So when he came back to therapy, I was like, man, what's up, man? How's football going? He's like, I remember talking to your mom when it first started. You were doing good. He was like, man, I hate football. I'll never want to do it again. I was like, what happened? I'm like, what happened? He was like, Brandon, the football coach keep trying to have sex with my mom. So I didn't want to do it. And I was like, damn, like he didn't hate football. He hated that experience because the coach was trying to, have sex with his mom. So for him, he, in his child brain, he's connecting that whole experience as in this is a violation of my comfort zone, my
Right.
family, that this man is trying to have sex with my mom. Now, I don't know if the mom and the coach actually had sex or not, or what the case was, but for this boy to see that wasn't role modeling proper behaviors. And it honestly sheltered him from something that was probably positive for his development.
Right. Well, that brings me up with the story that in my travels, I was helping a young man who's doing great work around the country, and he's we were talking, and he at the time, he had a girlfriend, and that they had a child together, and he was thinking about marrying her and that kind of stuff, and but and then he got to talking about he had another girl on the side. I said, oh, interesting. He says, don't you have, ain't that what you're supposed to do? I said, what are you talking about? He said, man, the leadership around here, man, some of the guys I know, I thought that's what you're supposed to do is right. have a woman. But again, and he was really adamant about it. He was shook when I said, no, that is not part of, I'm not saying that I'm the most perfect man in the world, but that is not to go along with that, because it actually hurt me to see it in his eyes. He was really shook by that information, right? He learned from that, and he moved on. He went on and got married and everything else, and doing well, doing very well. Because the thing is one of the things I learned about having those having all the, these different relationships going on. If you are working on leadership, it takes away from the energy you need to survive trying to lead. Mm-hmm. That you need to lead, right? Because I wouldn't wish a leadership position in terms of this kind of stuff on anybody. Because in doing it in a healthy way is really hard, because you got so much stuff coming at you, right? Because you got some people, their whole, it's like you hear these movies where you get the boy who plays sports really well, or you get a rapper or entertainer, and they interview him. Why did you want to do this? Well, I was good at it, but I also found that was a great way to get women. Right? Same thing with leadership.
Yeah.
Whatever that leader is, and you got to watch out for that. Right? It's an ongoing kind of thing, and it's not even just with women and that kind of stuff. It's just with all the stuff you that people will allow you to get away with and not see until it fully blows up.
Right. Then
everybody don't want to know you. It's bad when something happens and it all on the news and everybody says, "Oh, I'm not surprised." Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but being leader, leaders can actively block community healing and development initiatives because they haven't been unwilling to face their own healing issues, or because they are benefiting from the way things are now. Mm-hmm. Think about that. Benefiting with things, and one of the examples of that is I've been in cities and even here where we have leadership that don't live in the community, stir stuff up, right? Go home and leave the community all stirred up, and the people living in the community catch all the hell, right?
Right.
And then they the ones that getting paid to do the lectures.
Mm.
I mean, if things got better, what would they do?
Right. Yeah. What's the next grift?
Right.
what's the next wave to hop on? It's sad, man, to even read a speech from Dr. King or look at quotes from any leader during the civil rights movement, and the same stuff is applicable. You can apply it today, like nothing, because nothing has. I mean, things have changed, but when it comes to power dynamics, cultural power dynamics, nothing has shifted. And when it's come to the culture within our own community, how much of that culture has improved? Like, we have to be honest about that. I think some of the stuff that's gone on with us has been in a regression. Like, we're moving backwards, and that's sad.
Well, the thing is, some of our leadership, has kind of sabotaged, our community movement because it's enmeshed in dysfunction, codependent relationships, right? That don't allow members and institutions to learn new and healthy ways of thinking or acting, right? And again, when we look at parts of the community and that kind of stuff under the terms of dysfunction and codependency, sometimes you got to make some tough decisions that, again, there's not that popular at the time. Right. And then most of all, is to the issue of trying to protect our community and ourselves in terms of continually doing the evaluation of where I'm at in the healing process, right? Right. And so let me move past something, because there's something that I'm thinking about, and we got a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Is this whole issue around leadership and gender?
Okay.
I had a gentleman say to me, "Why don't black women let black men lead?" I'm still trying to figure that one out. Yeah, and that worries me, right? It's one thing to have distrust in community leadership, but it's a whole nother thing to have distrust in terms of community ship along gender lines.
Right.
This whole idea of who has the right, well, not even gender lines. We can talk about age lines, right? Right. Who has the right to be in a leadership position? Because there's some young folks out here doing their thing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, they might not be
locally for us.
Yeah, maybe not doing it the way I would do it, but who said the way I was doing it was well? Because again, if you an old dude and you talking about, well, they ain't doing it, or I wouldn't do it that way. Well, doing it your way we still in the same place. So what the heck? You should go sit down and pay attention, and support some of these young folks. Now, one of the things I've learned with some of our young leadership, they have their own trauma, and they are kind of leery of us old people,
right?
And rightfully so. So you have to get their trust privately. That public stuff might get you in trouble. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that going back and forth publicly, you're responding what you're hearing publicly, not getting to understand what really going on with them privately, right? Because I've been in situations where I've dealt with young leaders privately and been able to help them see certain things differently, right? And them hurt and know and they're able to help me see what their long-term goal in the way they're doing things, right? The method to their madness,
Right.
right? And again, that because that calling, it's like Pookie and New Jack City. It's calling me. The leadership is calling me. Because it could be it's calling me. I can't. It's calling me, and you're in the way. It's calling me, and like when some of us old folks need to get out the way. This. And when I say get out the way, they don't mean disappear. Again, that all or nothing kind of stuff, right? Give young people a reason to want to trust you for your advice.
Right. And develop young people.
Right.
When I look at just locally, leaders or people who are put in leadership position, many of them don't have younger folks around them or behind them, cultivating them to either take their position or assume others.
Yeah. And also teach them how to have balance in terms of their lives. Mm-hmm. Our babies, our babies of leaders have to stop being casualties of their leadership.
Yeah.
And the more the merrier. A person wants to take a leadership position, support them, because we know that having that singular leader has not been to our best interest, right? And that whole Messiah syndrome, I'm glad that we are pretty much over that Messiah syndrome for the most part, right? So, so that they don't come at one against the other. But that whole thing around gender, it's like, well, black women won't let us lead, and look at the system. They're elevating black women and that kind of stuff. Well, okay. So the mainstream is elevating in your eyes black women over black men, and so now we got this way of having us at each other's throat instead of figuring out how do we make that to our benefit? How do we learn how to support sisters the way they was trying to support us? Because I know that the last time I think I was demasculated by a woman was when my mama called me a sissy. Mm-hmm. Not everybody gonna like you and like the way you do it, but a voice of reason, a voice of leadership should not be squashed because of his gender, because of his age, or background. Mm-hmm. Because doing it the way we were doing it lacked a certain amount of sustainability. And sustainability is what we're going to need, especially after these past 4 years. New leadership is what we're going to need after these last 4 years. We need to, not only is it, we keep talking about Corona and Trump is a wake-up call to the white folks, and it should be a wake-up call for us. Because there's some spaces we've been lacking in as well, and it also been a wake up call on new leaders, new way of leading, right? And so this is our time. This is our time to support the folks who want to put in the work and support them in a way that they don't get so drained that their children don't get lost in the shuffle, and their relationships don't get lost in the shuffle, and we can do this, and we don't have to do this in the same framework that we're given. Remember that framework that's been, some of that framework been given is given to us by the same people we call oppressors. We have the opportunity to work on building a community and a culture that utilize old and new and be and take and be and end up in the foreground. And it's going to be real important now because again, we have a new president who's not as crazy as the other old white man, right? But throughout history, anytime people get to talking about we need to make peace with the other side of whiteness, we haven't always benefited so well. So we got to be aware of that. They've spent the last 10, 20 years trying to relate to the other side of whiteness over there. The folks, the forgotten white folks. And they're only forgotten because they went for the okie doke. Mm. And the only reason the okie doke worked is because of the issue of race. And in a strange way, in a small way, I feel bad for them to go for the okie doke that was not even in their own best interest, because they're and not all maybe, but many blind by that issue around race.
Right.
So be on guard. I know that sometimes you get beaten down and you get picked up and there's a white hand that gives you the hand and pick you up,
That soothing oppression, that soothing lotion.
Yes. That you think we have arrived. I watched a movie last night called One Night in Miami. Actually, it was excellent. And there's a scene in the movie because the movie is about Malcolm X, Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, and oh God, I can't think of the singer. It'll come to me. And it starts with Jim Brown going back home, going to this white man's house, right? Initially, his daughter didn't appear like she wanted to let him in because he's black. Then he said he was Jim Brown, and she called her daddy, who must be into sports or he's the governor. I didn't put it all together, that part. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they sit on the front porch, and the little girl brings them lemonade and all this other kind of stuff, right? And he's telling Jim, I am proud that you're from our state, and I don't care what other people say. I am proud that our state, came, you are part of it, and it's the greatest thing happened. And if you need anything, just let me know, right? Mm-hmm. And so his granddaughter, comes out and says, "Grandpa, don't forget that we need to move the dresser, right? You don't have to do it right now, but don't forget." So the grandpa said, tells Jim, and they're sitting on the front porch now, right? "I'll be right back." And he goes inside the house, and the older dude, and Jim gets up in the scene and says to the guy, he says, "You're moving furniture? I could help you." And with a straight face, with a smile on him, he said, "Jim, a nigga can't come in a white man's house." Mm. So the moral of the story, watch out for the lemonade.
It ain't gonna get you that far. Yeah. But you know what? The sad part about it is we've gotten to a point where just the taste of the lemonade is good enough. That ain't gonna work.
hey, man. It was like, yeah, but I sat there and it's like, yeah, that got me. It pulled me in, and that scene just
Yeah,
wrecked it. Like, and the look on his face, like, I mean, if you'd have listened to the white dude, shoot, he sounded like, hey, man, I want to kiss you and go to, I mean, he was all on about how much he will do for him, and he wants to be
yeah.
close, and I'm your, and
But
he's
there is
with
a
a straight,
boundary.
but with a straight face. His face had a smile on his face, like you supposed to understand that you
Right.
ain't, no.
Well, we've already been served our lemonade back in October. Really pretty much September when Kamala brought it out to us, and we've been sipping it ever since the election. So it's about to be interesting. Yeah, it's about to get real interesting because I think a lot of the energy that was expressed over the summer, unfortunately after the murder of George Floyd, I think the leaders, quote unquote, the people that are been put in leadership position or positions of influence, they have galvanized around that, and they figured out a way to diminish a lot of that momentum. And with Trump being impeached now, and him being voted out at this point, man, I think a lot of us have just been lulled right back to sleep, man. I think I don't know if we got the same energy or the same focus. But one thing that I wanted to mention before we wrap up tonight, because you mentioned, the clock that we're on a clock, and I think that clock is ticking. I don't think we have as much time as we think, and this is where conspiracy theorist Jones comes out. I really think that I really think what's happening is we are being conditioned. Us Americans, white and non-white Americans, are being conditioned to really be more uh as one, and our cultures being blended. I think that the idea of a black community is starting to not it won't be a black community. That's going to get cleaned out. And the focus is on making everybody Americans. And the thing is, for black folks who are listening to this theory that I have is not about them doing things and showing things to us, because we're already conditioned to lean towards white to be anti-black. It's conditioning for them. So if you pay attention to the commercials that have been coming out, I would say over the last since COVID, and especially now, you're gonna see a lot more interracial couples. You're gonna see a lot of things happening where we're having more blended ethnic groups into one, because it's the idea is to have people as more of Americans than in these racial categories. But there's so many. This country's founded on so much racism that it's a lot of work to be done. But that's where I feel like we're being. The term is called admixture, and I feel like that's where we're headed.
Okay. Oh, by the way, it was Sam Cooke is the fourth
Sam
person.
Cook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Stuart Knight got it for us.
Yeah. So okay. So you're going. The interesting. I don't know if it's sad or interesting. Because I'm not opposed to blended folks and families. But if you ever noticed on all the commercials right now, almost all the couples that have a black person in it, they're married or with a white person.
It's a
Have you
black
noticed
woman.
that? Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that. Of course.
I
But
mean, all
because
the commercials. I mean, it's like, have you noticed that?
that's the same. The reason for that is the same reason why that guide said, Sam, when are black women gonna let us lead? It's
Right.
because black women in our community hold a significant influence. And if you can condition black women to believe that white men are the option, that's what the narrative in the community is gonna be. But you also have to condition the other side to believe that black women are an option.
Right. Yeah,
See?
because even the few commercials that do have black men in them, it's the same thing.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a blended society under white value systems is exactly what is happening. It's a whole higher level of gentrification. You talk about gentrifying neighborhoods, think about gentrifying a whole cultural group or multiples.
Yeah. And the thing is what we have to be aware of is we have to look at these things from above it, right?
Right.
You
Right.
know, and not with that all or nothing response, right? You can't
Exactly.
be with this person, you can't be that person. Look at the bigger picture. The bigger
Right.
picture is to distract us as a community from what we need to do as a community, because
Right.
we're the most inclusive community. Our community is most
Yes.
inclusive
We
because
let everybody in.
with everybody, we'll include those folks that they're trying to show us, right?
We're
But
applying for it.
right. And so, but the issue is the bigger picture is how do you have this friction between black men and black women when it should be a partnership,
Right. Right.
right? Because we're easily distracted, get caught up. Look at them black women with that white man, or look at black men with white women. You know,
Yep.
we get caught up all in that, and all end up losing, right? Because we end up losing from the foundation of a community in terms of of all or nothing, right?
Right.
And but the big picture is how do we keep talking about? Well, we need to come together as a community. How you gonna do that when you as men and women who have been scarred by each other?
Yeah.
Just don't ignore that.
Yep. And we play victim very well, both
Right.
sides.
Yes. We all be scarred, but we got to understand where those scars begin,
Yeah.
right? And everything that's good for you ain't comfortable,
Right.
right? And resiliency doesn't always include love.
Mm. But Sam, we just need love, and everything will be okay.
Yeah, well, you got to know how to love to be for it to be okay. What does that
Both.
mean,
Both.
right? It's like my guys in my group. I remember one guy said this dude was hit in the head with a hot frying pan. Him and his wife fighting. I mean, he wasn't no perfect dude. They had breakfast, and she was madder than dog. And she asked him a question, and he didn't give him right at. Hit him with the frying pan in the head, right? And it got into a fight after that, of course. He gets charged with domestic. He's in my group. And he tells me the story. And they're both nuts. He tells me the story. But at the same breath, he says, but I love her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot. Well, I'll say mostly young people, but I've seen some people my age and older as well, where if there isn't an argument happen, if that level of toxicity isn't present in the relationship, that means you don't care about me, which says a lot about how we have developed culture around trauma. That you have to have conflict in order to be loved, or even to feel what love is.
So,
But that's a conversation for a whole nother day.
Yes, it is, because we're over time. So, what you want to? What I want? Can we end on that? Can we all end up on a happy note? Can we all get along?
I think the possibility of getting along definitely, but getting along to what end, for what purpose is the key, right? Some people get along by not speaking and silencing themselves. Some people get along by demanding that people believe in their views and things like that. But one thing that I would want to end on is getting along is one thing with other people, but leadership, as we started, starts within, and everybody should plan to be a leader within themselves and hopefully have a constructive influence on others. So to me, my definition for leadership is an individual who's able to facilitate constructive action within a system. And it starts with yourself first.
And again, a role model is someone who knows the babies are watching and acts accordingly.
Absolutely. Well, that's it. Another installment of the Healing Brothers podcast. We'll be back next week with another great topic. Peace.